Last time on Mission Neo Geo. Today we embark upon a journey of vengeance. 3 individuals must fight to survive a battle in a war-torn city run by the most dangerous of gangsters. But these individuals don't settle the score with bullets and knives. They settle it with their fists. They must fight to survive. They are the only ones who can stop the man at the top. The one who runs organized crime, the government, the police. No one can stop him, but only they can be the ones to defeat him with the greatest of martial arts. Feet and fist, both hitting bone and flesh. Today on Mission Neo Geo we discuss... Last week's episode we discussed Fatal Fury 1. The fight against Geese Howard. But did you know the story didn't begin with Fatal Fury? It began with Art of Fighting. Today on Mission Neo Geo we discuss Art of Fighting 1 and 2. Appreciate it, Ty. What it is, it's your guy, Neo Ness, back again with another Mission Neo Geo video. And today we're talking about 2 fighting games within the Art of Fighting franchise, Art of Fighting 1 and 2. This continues on from our Southtown story that we just finished on last week's episode, if you're watching this in chronological order from release. Fatal Fury 1. Fatal Fury 1 really begins with the story of Terry and Andy Bogart coming of age and battling it out with Geese Howard, who is the kingpin, the big dog in Southtown. He's running gambling, organized crime, etc. But with Art of Fighting, this takes place of actually around a decade before the events of Fatal Fury 1. So Art of Fighting 1 was released in 1992, and this takes place roughly about a decade or so before the events of Fatal Fury 1, where we follow the story of Ryo Sakazaki and Robert Garcia. And the whole plot of this is Ryo and Robert are after this crime syndicate because Ryo's sister Yuri has been kidnapped. Now, the entire reason of Yuri being kidnapped within the story is mainly because Mr. Big, who's the big crime boss in town and within Southtown, is wanting to recruit Ryo to join his forces. But when Ryo says, no, I'm not about that life, they kidnap Yuri, and the entire game is consisting of a full-on story where you're battling it out with each opponent to find out more information about where the whereabouts of Yuri is. Robert and Ryo both come across Mr. Big. Now, Mr. Big they defeat, but also by the tail end of that, there's one other guest or secret boss that you have to fight, Mr. Karate. Now, we've seen Mr. Karate throughout majority of SNK's games, mainly within Art of Fighting. We saw Mr. Karate within a couple of crossovers, SVC Chaos, we saw him there as well, but really the first game ends on a cliffhanger, like literally no joke. You beat Mr. Karate and you're trying to figure out who is behind the mask, and Yuri is just about to disclose the true identity of Mr. Karate when black screen, to be continued. You really don't see this in a lot of video games where it's just like really movie, and it really gives me a straight up action-packed martial arts movie from the 80s kind of feel here. Your sister's been kidnapped and you and a buddy, you gotta fight a bunch of guys and show off your famous martial arts techniques. This gives me straight up martial arts B movie from the 80s, all the way through and through. Now, in terms of the gameplay of this game has extremely huge sprites, and at the time, this was probably the biggest sprites that you could find in terms of character design. Bigger than Fatal Fury, bigger than Street Fighter, in terms of like first Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, things of that nature. This had the biggest sprites. Now, in terms of background animations, it was pretty stagnant. It wasn't as detailed as some of the later titles, but in terms of detail for character damage, you could definitely see as they get your character or the opponent gets punched and kicked, you're gonna see more damage. Bruised eyes, cheeks, black eyes, all that kind of stuff. And even to a point to where if you're playing the Japanese version, you can actually blow off clothes. So for some of the female characters like King, if you're doing a special technique, actually her top just blows off. Now, for the sake of the video, I'm not going to do that, but just so you know, if you're playing the original Japanese version, you're going to see a little bit more in terms of garments being blown off, and that goes for male characters as well. This game's platform releases came out on the AES, the Neo Geo CD, Super Nintendo, which I have a copy of that as well, Mega Drive, Sega Genesis, PC Engine. PlayStation 2 actually got a copy of this with the Art of Fighting anthology, so all 3 of the fighting games from Art of Fighting series will be there, and that was released around 2007. So if you don't want to get this game on the Neo Geo, or if you don't have a Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis version, PlayStation 2 would be your next best bet to play this game on some of the newer hardware out there. Now, in terms of bonus stages, you actually have an option between your bonus stages. There's the bottle cut, which the objective is to cut off the tops of 5 bottles, and the player must press the A button exactly right. So you want to get it as close to max as possible, press it just in time, and then your character will slice through, kind of like the old Karate Kid chopping through the ice bricks in the 80s from Karate Kid 2. It's kind of similar to that. So it gives a nice, cool ambiance for the player to gather additional strength, but this gives you bonus power for the next fight. So it's kind of cool. It's not just a bonus stage that's just gonna, you know, like, oh, you beat it, here's your points. It actually applies to you on the next upcoming battles in terms of strength, longer power, energy, etc. So you can do the ice pillar smash, and then you can initiate super death blows. There's tons of different styles of things that you can do within this game. In terms of the game itself, I have the dog tag version of Art of Fighting 1, and the condition isn't the greatest. This one has seen some better days. The insert, of course, with the classic black, it pops. It's got like, it gives me that movie poster feel that you would feel for like one of those old 80s martial arts films. It kind of gives that vibe on the front. I really like the front of this cover. It is really, really cool. Now, in terms of the manual's condition isn't very good, and I really need to upgrade a copy of this game. I got this one pretty early on. The plastic on the inside of the box isn't very good. It's cracked. And then, of course, the cartridge itself, this game has been played a lot, even before I got it. This cartridge plays well, could use a little bit of cleaning, but other than that, this is a solid game to have in the collection. If you're all for like story-based games, and I'm talking about just in terms of a little bit more depth than your average beat-em-ups, this is definitely a really good series to play through. Now, the first 2 Art of Fightings track within the storyline. The third Art of Fighting, which I don't have in the collection, which is why we haven't gone through it on a Mission Neo Geo episode. Remember, folks, all Mission Neo Geo episodes are based off of all the games that I currently have in my collection right now. So as I continue to collect more AES titles over the next couple of months, year, whatever, then I'll add additional episodes to go over the story, playability, pricing, all that good stuff for future episodes. So all in all, this game is pretty decent, and if I had to give this game a grading, it's pretty simple, but it is difficult. It is pretty difficult. The gameplay is a little stiff, not as fluid as some of the other fighting games that we'll play later on down the life cycle of Neo Geo, so there's that. I would give this a rating of, I'm kind of torn. I'm thinking more of a 2 or 2 to 2.5 in terms of rating for the playability. Now the story, however, of this game, I'll give a 4.5. And this is probably the first time that I'm going to do that. In terms of story, I'll give a 4.5 just because it keeps you engaged, it keeps you involved. You want to get to the end, you want to figure out where the story is going in this game. Especially, I mean, considering for such an early title back in the early 90s for a fighting game, to be able to give you just enough to continue playing the game because you want to know the story behind this. They did a really good job behind that. So kudos to the developers that created this game for sure. Now, in terms of pricing for Art of Fighting 2, and it's kind of skewed on eBay if we're looking at recently sold. So we've got one here that recently sold back in December of 2023, roughly around 240 bucks. There was another one that sold in December of 2023 around 349. I would say that based off of the going average from the year 2023, and that's just depending on the time of when you're watching this video, average price is roughly around $250 and some change. Now, when I purchased my copy of Art of Fighting 2 dog tag, it was around the $200 range. Now, if you're deciding to go after, you know, whether that's Art of Fighting 2 or Art of Fighting 1, the Japanese versions go pretty inexpensive. So you're looking at under $100 for the Japanese version. So if you're looking to save yourself, you know, 100 some odd bucks, then that would be the way to go. If you're looking for the English copy of this game online, be prepared to pay somewhere in the realm of $250 to $300. However, I will say this, but if you look on Facebook groups, etc., you might be able to save yourself somewhere around the $50 to $75 range by going with a private seller instead. But that seems to be the going rate for everything Art of Fighting as well. You may even get lucky on a bid and you may save yourself maybe $150 and get one for right at $100. This isn't a super expensive game, so if anyone's asking you, oh, this is going to be a $500 game, no. Art of Fighting 1 and 2 is not a $500 game. It's not a $400 game. At max, I would pay maybe $300 for this game, and that's if it's completely mint and crispy, but that's on the very, very high side. Art of Fighting 2 may get you a little bit in the higher range, but other than that, that is where we are at with the pricing with this game. Now, taking a look at Art of Fighting 2, on the other hand, Art of Fighting 2, the insert is different, and of course they did not do a dog tag version of this game. They went with the classic Euro spine, which is what the later titles would move to. We wouldn't see the bulldog on the side, we would just see the Neo Geo on the top, and the insert itself would have more of a grayish background than the dark black version. Box is in pretty good shape. There is a little bit of damage here on the back. And then, of course, the cart plastic case is looking really good and sharp. Manual isn't too bad. And a little bit of here, but if you look at the character design, it gives you some depth behind each individual character, which is great. And then the cartridge itself looks pretty decent, some relatively wear. You'll see more wear on Art of Fighting games just because these games generally are played unless you just happen to find a sealed version later on down the road, so there is that. Art of Fighting 2 takes place 1 year after the events of Art of Fighting 1. Yuri has been recovered and she's back with her brother and Robert. And of course, really, the unmasking of Mr. Karate is better known as Takuma, who is Ryo's father and the successor or the creator of the Kyokugen karate style. So He's the discipline of Ryo's fighting style, and of course we continue the story of Robert, who is their billionaire friend. And if you notice with these fighting games, it does a very similar notion to DC related comics. And what I mean by that, Batman, Green Arrow, you're going to have your superheroes who are the super duper billionaires. In Street Fighter and in Art of Fighting, we have a very similar case where their friend is a billionaire Ryu in one. He's the depth of the martial arts technique that they have, and he has a partner in crime who also studies under the same fighting style, but is also a rich guy as well. Very much so a very similar story with Ryo and Robert here, where both of them study very similar style, or they study the same fighting style. However, they've taken on different techniques. The Ryo, you have his punching techniques, the very secret technique, or the Shoryuken, which technically isn't in the manual in terms of techniques to use, but you can utilize a Shoryuken style technique. And then of course Robert uses his legs for kicking, so where he's got the rapid punch where he just bam and uppercuts you, Robert does it with kicks and then finishes it off with like a Jean-Claude Van Damme style finish. Now, in terms of continuity of this game, we've talked about it. This is 1 year after Art of Fighting 1 that we take place with Art of Fighting 2, and this is roughly a decade or a little bit longer before the events of Fatal Fury 1. It's like this one massive setup, right? Takuma, who was Mr. Karate, was set up with Mr. Big and Geese behind the scenes. Now, in the first Art of Fighting game, we didn't see or hear about Geese at all. We didn't know anything about Geese in Art of Fighting 1. But when we go into 2, we see not only that the story has evolved more after Yuri's been saved, Ryo and Robert are back at it again to figure out the full depth of what happened, why these events happened. Takuma is kind of ashamed, but he's running the dojo now. Mr. Karate has been put to bed for a time being, and we have that. But getting to the gameplay of Art of Fighting 2, combos, the punching, the kicking has moved a little bit faster. The techniques have to be a little bit more precise. They're not as easy as they were in Art of Fighting 1. Now, you still have to charge up your energy bars, etc. Now, for the sake of this video, because I wanted to get to the secret boss, I used some cheats on the Unibios so that way we could get to the end boss, just to show you that it is possible to get to this character, which we did.
Hell no, no.
Geese Howard is a secret boss at the very end of this game, in Art of Fighting 2. To get to him, can't lose a round. So 2 rounds that you have to beat each opponent that you face. So you can't die. That's the only way that you can get to him from my knowledge. Win the first 2 rounds of every battle that you go across, and then you face Mr. Big at the tail end of this. But guess what? Right after that, the story continues, and you have a card say, hey, Ryo, Robert, whoever that you're playing with, the police commissioner wants to speak with you. Well, your character is going to be like, okay, fine, I'll go check out and see what the police commissioner wants. But come to find out, your police commissioner is Geese Howard. So this entire time, Geese has been behind the scenes. He's been planting his seeds everywhere across Southtown to become the ultimate big player within the city. I used the Unibios cheats on this, I'm not gonna lie. I could not beat Geese Howard on my first playthrough without any energy and all the extra bonuses and all that stuff. So I made it all the way to Geese, legit, and then Geese just murdered me over and over relentlessly, to the point where I had to come back a second day and actually film this footage for Art of Fighting 2. So you know what I did? I put the cheats on, all that stuff, boo bam, done because I wanted to get to the end story of this. Now, will I dedicate some time to actually beat Geese? Yes, because young Geese is probably 10 times worse than the Geese that we faced in Fatal Fury 1. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. He's probably the hardest Geese of all iterations of Geese in all fighting games. This version in Art of Fighting 2, he is the hardest. He is the cheapest of the cheapest skates out there. I know that probably didn't make any sense, but this man will spam repukins and this little over the top, like the going thing on YouTube right now is if you want to beat him, get in close, throw him, throw your fireball or whatever to back off, throw him again, keep throwing him. It's not going to be a battle of fighting techniques. It's not. You're going to have to cheese your way to get him to go and die. And that's it. So you beat him, and just when, in my particular case, Rio is about to finish him off, the lights go out and Geese gets away. But before he gets away, we find out he's traveled to Japan to get away for a while, but he's still running things in Southtown to a point to where he finds out that there's an unexpected fighter out there that's doing some research on him, doing some investigating on him. And who other do we find? Andy and Terry Bogard's father, Jeff. That's right. So the events that lead up to the very tail end after you've beaten Geese in Art of Fighting 2 bring us to the very ending point where Geese is like, we got to get rid of this guy. And well, after it's all said and done, they're like, hey, Geese is like, it's time to take this dude out. Take him out of here. We want him gone. We don't need anybody ruining our plans. And then from Art of Fighting 2, we fast forward to Fatal Fury 1. So crazy story amongst fighting games so early on. Generally, we're just accustomed to seeing some kind of quick storyboard at the very end of a fighting game, but we have not one, not two, but 3 fighting games that have some continuity in terms of a storyline, which is amazing. So Fatal Fury 1, and then its prequel would be Art of Fighting 1 and 2. Now, side note, Art of Fighting 3 does not follow the same storyline. Well, it's within the same universe, but instead of continuing it on with the Geese, Terry Bogard, Robert, and Rio storyline, it actually follows a different storyline based off of Robert's backstory. So when we get that game eventually, we'll go down that rabbit hole and figure out what the story is. But in terms of what I give this rating for this game, I give Art of Fighting 2 a 3. Just because the combat system is a little bit more polished, there's more characters, the character designs are a little bit better, the background animation in the game is a little bit more detailed, not as crazy as some of the other games out there, but it is a little bit more detailed. Art of Fighting 2 was released in 1994, so 2 years after the events of, or 2 years after the release of Art of Fighting 1, we got Art of Fighting 2. And in terms of chronological fighting games that were released on Neo Geo, Fatal Fury was the very first fighting game, and then Art of Fighting was the second fighting game on the Neo Geo. Kind of crazy when you think about it. You know, the prequel was done second to the first fighting game, and in terms of story, the second game is the prequel to the first fighting game. So kind of a flip-flop there, but I like what SNK was doing in terms of the story. So overall, Art of Fighting 1 I give 2.5, and Art of Fighting 2 I give a 3. Overall story for everything holistically, I give a 4.5. And the reason why I'm separating this is because there's just a lot more depth in this game in terms of the story, that if you actually played all these games together, you get more into it. So definitely recommend, just for the story. The gameplay, it's hit or miss. It's not the greatest fighting game out there. The character sprites are large, huge. There is damage that you see, which is really cool how they did that. Special techniques, charging your energy so you can be able to use those special techniques again. It's a little cumbersome at times just because you're like waiting to charge, but your opponents generally, the CPUs don't give you enough time to do a full bar charge. So you have to be strategic on how you're using your special techniques in this game, which isn't a bad thing, but for me, I'm accustomed to playing fighting games where I can just spam special techniques all day in a year if I want to, which is the general way of a casual. So there is that. So, have you played this game? Did you know about Young Geese? Have you played Young Geese? Have you beaten Young Geese in Art of Fighting 2? Do you have Art of Fighting 1 and 2 in your collection? If so, drop comments down below, let me know, and as always, collect and play the way that you want to collect and play your games. Tiberius, take us out of here. In terms of today, the Tiberius rating I'm going to give Art of Fighting 1 is a 2.5. While this game has large sprites and has a good replayability, I feel that it's a little clunky and could do with a little bit more polishing. In terms of Art of Fighting 2, I will give it a rating of 3. The combo capabilities have been increased, a little bit better to play, and of course, there's a more depth behind the story of this game. We see the first actual place where Geese Howard begins within the very Southtown story, not in Fatal Fury 1, but the backstory many years prior to Jeff Bogart's demise. Dearest friends, we thank you for gathering once again on today's exciting episode of Mission Neo Geo. We bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you. On next week's episode, it shall not be a fighting game, but we will go down the depths of another genre on Mission Neo Geo, and it will be, well, it is to be continued. See you again.